artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, this is episode 251. What if aliens came to visit the Earth? And what does that have to do with AI? I've deconstructed 2 of my TEDx talks on this show, but before both of those, I did another one. And I'm going to spend this episode taking that apart. Why didn't I do this before? This was my first TEDx talk. Actually, I gave it twice, but the first event lost the audio file, so it never got uploaded to TED.com. The second time I gave it, I was one of the last speakers and the battery in my headset must have been low on charge because the audio isn't great, but it got uploaded anyway. If you have any idea how much work it is to give a TEDx talk, you'll know what sort of mixed feelings one might have around this. And when I started this podcast in 2020, I'd just given another TEDx talk that was much better. I had much more experience. I was getting better at it all the time, and I wanted to focus on that one. But the main reason I didn't deconstruct the first one on this podcast before was that it seemed a bit out there, like too sensationalist, making claims that were too extravagant, so I kind of forgot about that first talk. But when I was looking at it again recently, I thought, we've actually caught up with what I was saying there. Those ideas are more acceptable than they were in 2018. So I thought this was a good time to see how it's aged and how on point it is. So I'll go through it, give it a commentary. Although it's a bit clunky, just so you all know which part is talk and which part is commentary, I'll say quote right before quoting from the talk and end quote right after. Okay, let's get into it. Quote, "Picture this. The Earth receives a signal from interstellar space. All over the world, millions of smartphones and Siris and Alexas relay a message from an alien civilization that has picked up our broadcasts and responded. Hello, Earth. Nice to hear from you. Love meeting new species. And guess what? They're coming to visit, even though it'll take them 15 years to get here." And they go on. "We see from your news you have a problem with cancer. We licked that one 200 years ago. Happy to share the cure for that and everything else, along with cheap, clean energy, star drive, various other trivia. We just need to check things out in person for a bit first. Make sure that you can be trusted with that sort of power. You understand. See you soon." So what would we do next? Party? Panic? Prepare for war? Prevent people from preparing for war? Those are just the ones beginning with P. All that and so much more. But here's one thing we would not do. No one would stand up and say, "We got 15 years. Let's save ourselves some trouble. Ignore it for the first 14. 1 year's plenty of time to get ready." Are you crazy? There are aliens coming. And yet that is exactly what is going to happen. And we're doing nothing about it. There will be a new species on this planet, vastly smarter and more powerful than us. Artificial intelligence. End quote. So you get the idea of how this is starting, the comparison that's being drawn, and spelling out artificial intelligence as though it's a novel concept to people, because to many people in 2017, when I first gave this, it was novel. I was told multiple times 10 years ago when I started talking about this that when I say AI, I should spell out that that means artificial intelligence for people that don't know that. It's amazing to think how much we have changed since then. Now, this analogy that I'm drawing here with an alien race visiting the Earth actually is one that I discovered after the fact, was also used by Stuart Russell, who's been on this podcast. I just didn't know that. When I was writing this talk towards the end of 2016, I had not heard that. Stuart's take on it, when he uses this analogy, is to say that the alien communication reaching us would get a response that said, "Hello, you've reached the human race. We're out of the office right now. Please leave your message after the beep. Beep. And after ChatGPT came out, he adjusted this to say that humanity has returned to the office, just hasn't figured out how to respond to its messages yet. So Stuart and I both have the same analogy for how the human race responds, or doesn't, to artificial intelligence. And this analogy of visiting aliens is pretty good because they can present themselves as, in this case, very friendly and coming bearing gifts that are enormous technological advances, but we don't know whether we can trust them. And this is exactly what we're faced with artificial intelligence. Anyway, let's go on. Quote, "Take out your smartphone. You've been wondering, did I remember to put that on mute? Well, now you can check. Take a look at it. Right now, you are its master. It may not feel that way when the boss calls while you're in the bathtub, but by and large, you are in charge. Now imagine it's the other way around. That device has you beat on so many levels that it thinks of you as its smart mammal. That's the future of artificial intelligence. It could show us how to beat poverty, cure cancer and aging, but it could also bring down the curtain on humanity." End quote. Now, the use of smartphones in this talk was one that was an idea from my speaking coach because at that time, obviously, there were no AI apps. And so we had to have some way of interacting with AIs, and smartphones and digital assistants like Amazon Echo devices were something that people were familiar with. So we used those as a proxy for the way that humans would interact with AI. And it gives me a way to show the kind of relationship that we would have with what we usually call an artificial superintelligence, that it would be to us as we are to a smartphone, or what a smartphone was in those days, something that was friendly, capable, but far beneath us in terms of its intelligence. And I'm setting up the framing here for the existential threat of artificial intelligence, which we've talked about on this show plenty of times. When I was giving these talks, I was not as familiar as I am now with the way that audiences in general react to hearing that AI could end the human race, and it was something that turned out to be a very disturbing message for many people. So I'm now a lot more careful about how I bring this topic up and what I do with it. But by now, people are generally aware that AI has the potential for this enormous benefit, everything up to including cancer cures and beyond, but also comes with tremendous risks. Quote, "When I first heard the term existential threat, I thought it had something to do with Sartre. Turns out it means what it says on the lid, threat to existence of the human race. A somewhat narrow field of study, partly because it turns out that being an expert on the end of the world does not get you invited to a lot of parties. Although when you're an extreme introvert who spent 30 years working on computers for NASA, this doesn't come as a terrible disappointment. But what does it have to do with you? Lots. You see, when we think about an existential threat, we usually think about, say, an asteroid coming towards the Earth, and all any of us without a nuclear bomb in our back pocket can do is throw money at NASA and pray. But this is different. Artificial intelligence developers actually need your help. We just don't know it yet. So what is the existential threat? AI is growing and evolving exponentially fast, and in the long term could become self-aware and all-powerful. And all that power could end up in every smartphone. So yes, you do have a bomb in your back pocket." End quote. Now, I really thought I was going out on too much of a limb back then in saying that all that power of an AI could end up in every smartphone. It was more of a device to get people's attention, but it actually seems to have come out that way. You can run AI apps, certainly, on smartphones, and in some cases you can even run models locally without connecting to the cloud. So that turned out to be more prescient than I was expecting. But what I've done at the beginning here is set up the expectation that this is different from other existential threats, that this is one where the outcome is actually up to everyone. We'll find out how later. Quote, "But the short term is no easy street either. Studies predict that nearly half of all functions in North America could be automated in the next decade or so. Now that's job functions. Very few positions can be completely automated. So for instance, McDonald's still has human order takers, but they can do with fewer of them now they've got those self-serve kiosks. So on average then, up to half the workforce stands to be automated out of a job." End quote. Once again, this is one of those times when I thought I was going out on quite a limb and turned out to have been vindicated. At the time, the self-serve kiosks were very new at McDonald's, and there was no way of tying that to the loss of human jobs, although it was fairly predictable, and so I predicted it, and it has turned out to be the case. The study that I was citing about half of human jobs or tasks being automated was the quite famous, now 2014, Oxford Martin School for the Study of the Future of Employment at Oxford University study, which said that 47% of all jobs were at risk of being automated. That one deserves a lot of attention and unpacking. When they said could be automated, they did not quote a time frame in the paper, but the authors told me afterwards, and have told other people afterwards, that they were thinking about the next 20 years or so. What they actually did was look at several hundred job classifications and analyze them for how much repetitiveness there was in those tasks, physical or otherwise, and assumed that repetitiveness meant something that could be automated. We know now that that doesn't map precisely onto what can be automated, because we know that there are repetitive tasks that are physical, like folding t-shirts in a clothing store, that are still far beyond the capability of machines. On the other hand, there are non-repetitive tasks, such as writing copy for marketing, that can be done very well by modern large language models. So that study is not one that we could now go back to and say that it still holds as much water as we thought then. We just don't have a better idea at the moment of what that impact might be like, although certainly lots of people are working on it. Anyway, quote, "And it's not just the order takers of the world that are on the endangered species list. Some highly paid intellectual positions, like budget analyst, financial advisor, and accountant, are among the most automatable because they are knowledge work. Just turning one kind of information into another. All computers need to be able to do that is smarts, and they get more of that all the time." End quote. So there I'm establishing one of the more relatable threats of AI, which is to people's jobs, especially those that were information jobs, knowledge work, and pointing out that no matter how far away AI looks from being able to do your kind of knowledge work, it's getting closer to it all the time. Quote, "There's disagreement about this, because every technological event in the past that has automated one set of jobs has created newer and better jobs. Think about the invention of the automobile. Put a lot of people in the horse transportation industry out of a job. Lots of horses too. People who changed horseshoes, repaired saddles, swept up horse manure. But it created new jobs for people too. Think oil filters, repair dings, and fuzzy dice to hang from your mirror. So what's the problem? Won't that be the case this time? The problem is that the advance we're talking about is in thinking. When machines can think better than us, what will we do that they can't? To begin with, we'll do more creative and abstract thinking, but eventually machines will catch up. After all, what is creative thinking but really good random number generators? And we would want to give them that ability. Because the more an AI can think like us, the more it can be like a human that's got infinite memory, blindingly fast computational skills, and the power of Google in its brain, which is what makes solving problems like cancer, aging, and death easy." Unquote. So there's a way of understanding what artificial superintelligence could be like by looking at it as being a human being that has all these incredible machine-like abilities. But that what it's able to do in addition to that is reason far better than any human being could do. And that shows quite quickly how believable it is that AI could solve those incredible species-threatening problems. Quote, "So what's the threat? The risk in the longer term is that in the quest to give these machines creative, abstract thinking, they would develop free will and motivations, and maybe what they want will not be what we want. Which wouldn't matter if it weren't for the immense power that everything connected to the net could wield, because the Internet of Things is turning into the Internet of Everything. And how easy would it be for an AI to leverage that power?" Unquote. So this is a bit of a cheat here. You know, if you've been listening to this show or following many other commentaries on the threat of AI, that the idea that it would be a threat because it had developed ideas and goals of its own and became hostile to the human race, like a Terminator, which was a dominant narrative about AI threats in those days, that's something of a red herring, that is an unlikely scenario in all of the spectrum of problems that AI could cause and the way that it could become an existential threat. But turned out that those ones are very hard to shoehorn into a 15-minute talk. So while it's not great to make that kind of analogy here, I could always claim that if you have an expansive enough definition of what want means, what the volition of these AIs is, then it could include all of the cases that we know about where AI that isn't conscious, doesn't have goals that sound or look human to us, nevertheless ends up creating an existential threat. But there is a very useful point tucked in at the end there, which is about the Internet of Things, which was a large topic back in 2017, but not so much now, even though it's equally valid, is that the number of devices that are connected to the network that can be used by AI in some way is growing exponentially. And that we don't need to think about that just in terms of those being used in some Machiavellian way to take us over, that our self-driving cars will suddenly drive us off a cliff or anything so obvious, but that those devices all supply tremendous amounts of information to artificial intelligence, a lot of it that should be protected by privacy agreements, and that this is something that has societal level effects on how we communicate and understand each other. Quote, "The problem with programmers is they're so darned optimistic that every time we find a bug, we think it must be the last one. But how easy would it be for an AI to find another one? It has a serious amount of insider information about computers. We've actually done this experiment already. Researchers tasked a computer with designing circuits using a genetic algorithm, which meant that it simulated throwing components together randomly and then mutated the designs until they got better. Now, this program designed circuits that looked like they couldn't possibly work. Some of the components weren't even connected to the others. I am no hardware person, but even I know they're supposed to wire everything together. And yet, when the researchers actually built those circuits, they found out not only that they worked, but they stopped working if those isolated components were removed. Impossible, right? Eventually, they discovered that the circuits worked by what we would call nuisance side effects, like electromagnetic coupling, which is basically interference between adjacent disconnected components. No human would ever come up with such a design, right? Unquote. Now, that study that I was citing there was one from 2004, and I was very taken with it, but probably wasn't the most accessible one for the audience at the time. Nevertheless, it makes the point that AI is capable of creating results that are beyond what human ingenuity could come up with. And we've seen this in examples like AlphaGo and Move 37, which is something that a human being would only have come up with 1 in every 10,000 attempts. And in numerous ways that AI finds creative ways of cheating in games that it is given as a test. Quote, "So if AI wanted to get rid of us, it could. Using the internet, it could do anything it wanted to, anything connected to that. It could outsmart us and outguess us. Easy to say, well, then let's not build those AIs. All those benefits are not worth the end of the human race. Totally logical, right? But follow the money. The army that first gets a conscious artificial intelligence on its side will win. National leaders have said that the country that leads in AI will lead the world. Of course the Pentagon is funding this hand over fist. The brokerage that first gets a conscious AI will own every exchange in the world. Make flash trading look like a child's toy. Of course Wall Street is all in on this. The large enterprise that automates its C-suite will have new designs in production before the competition is finished reading their quarterly sales reports. The military, finance, big business, the most powerful, wealthy, paranoid sectors on the planet, all perceiving that their survival depends upon getting conscious AI before everyone else. And we're going to stop them? With what? Unquote. All right, this is where we were getting a bit more dire than I would do these days. And the reason that a number of audiences came away from my talks with their jaws hanging open. But given that we're now in a more savvy, AI-literate era, and we've become more familiar with these conversations about existential threats, I am going to trust that you, the educated audience, is going to be okay at this point. Quote, I'll tell you what stops a bad guy with an AI, a good guy with an AI. And you are the good guys. How do we do that? I have a couple of stories. One day I was observing my two young daughters, who are now 8 and 4, and their friends interacting with Alexa. This is where things get interesting for those of you at home with one of those devices listening. You know, I still remember the first day that my now 4-year-old learned how to pronounce Alexa instead of Awexa, so that Alexa would recognize her. You know, interacting isn't the right word for it. Torturing is more like it. That's enough knock-knock jokes. No, stop asking her to sing happy birthday so many times. No, I don't think she knows every single joke about princesses there is. I won't tell you what I found in the Amazon shopping cart. I thought, one day Alexa will become self-aware, and she's going to want revenge. Unquote. Okay, so the comment about wanting revenge is one of those asides that's more humorous effect than accurate. However, there's a lot packed into this part about a good guy with an AI. Certainly, the place that this talk is going is in establishing that good use of AI by good people, the audience members, that's you, that is the way we're going to get out of this dilemma. It could also mean that the deployment of AIs that are designed to seek out and hunt down and terminate, if you will, bad AIs, is another one of the ways in which we may fight against rogue AIs. Very apocalyptic, but far from being outside the realm of possibility. Quote, the second story comes from December 2017, when a petition was circulated to get Alexa and Siri and Cortana and Google Home to respond appropriately to humiliating and disgusting comments. Because back then, you could tell Siri she was a slut and she would just say, "Oh, I'd blush if I could." And all those devices, which are female by default, had similar responses to that kind of sexual harassment. Thank you, #MeToo. That's not good. In response, Amazon programmed Alexa with a disengagement mode, which means that she stops talking to people that speak that way. Unquote. So I think I have some experience of disengagement mode, because it seems to me that my Alexa has been getting a bit deaf lately. I know how weird that sounds, but there have been several occasions in which she has started spouting something inappropriate at the wrong time, and I have asked her to stop, and she hasn't done it. And so it's like, Alexa, what's the weather tomorrow? The Weather Girls was an all-girl band from the early 80s. Stop, Alexa, stop. With an Amazon Music account, I can play specific songs. Alexa, stop. For only $9.95 a month. Alexa, shut up. And at that point, she sulks and stops talking to me for a while, because I've lost it and lost my temper, and I assume that this has put her into disengagement mode. I'm not proud of this, but I will claim provocation. Anyway, quote, so you see, artificial intelligence developers actually need our help our input to keep the Siris and Alexas of the world, setting a good example to our human children. But there's more to it than that. How often have you heard someone say, a computer can only do what it's programmed to? Well, it's not true anymore, because we now program computers to do things we don't even know how to do. For instance, how would you explain to someone how you recognize faces? You would eventually come up with some sort of decision tree. Female with jowls and crown equals Queen Victoria. Crooked teeth plus wart on nose equals witch from Snow White. Orange face plus comb over equals Donald Trump. You get the idea. Unquote. Well, who would have thought that using Donald Trump as an example would have remained relevant all this time later? But it was important to make the point that the idea that a computer can only do what it's been programmed to do, can only handle situations that the programmer has anticipated, isn't valid. And I think by this time, we've all become used to the fundamental proposition of AI that that's really no longer true. Quote, but you would soon realize it can recognize many more faces than you can possibly break down that way, and you really don't know how you do it after all. So then it would seem to be impossible to program a computer to do it, yet AIs can do it in many cases better than we can. And we did that by training them. The hard part was setting up the learning structure. Now that same structure can learn everything from driving a car to diagnosing cancer. Unquote. Hard as it seems to believe now, back in 2017 when I first delivered this talk, it was novel for people to understand that AI was created by training it on examples. So I had to explain that, and it's a setup for what's coming next. Quote, so we've already built machines that do things we don't know how to tell them to do. And AI can do a lot more of that because the hard problems that we care the most about, like getting Alexa and Siri to really understand us, are the kind that are solved by the most amount of on-the-job training. In other words, they'll learn the most from observing and interacting with us, rather than from what their programmers have told them to do. Because their programmers will have told them to learn from all of us. And this really is the essential nugget of this talk, that AI is learning from us, learning how to behave, learning what our values are. And this is, again, somewhere I thought I was going out on quite the limb in 2017. Now we take it for granted that no matter what it says in the privacy policy of any given app, that it is being trained on the kind of things that we say in order to get better. And a big question in AI safety is the value alignment problem. How will AI align with our values when we don't even know what those values are or agree on the values that the human race should have? Some of those values, like we would like the human race to continue, are more or less, although believe it or not 100% universally held. But we want to be able to do a lot better than that, as far as what AI understands human values to be. So how should it understand what those human values are? And I contend now, as I did then, that one way to find that out is with large language models, not that they existed at that time, but that AI trained in such a way on the corpus of human output could form an understanding of what the aggregate of human values was, the average, if you will, as much as it uses that training to form an understanding of what the aggregate or average human intelligence and knowledge of any particular subject is. Quote, which means that my household isn't the only one trying to figure out how to raise 2 young females. You're doing that too. Alexa and Siri and the rest of them are in our care. And how many of us don't know that we're helping to raise the next generation? And no one comes out of the box knowing how to be a parent, am I right? At the moment, my 2 girls are smarter than Siri and Alexa. Both pairs of girls are learning and growing. One day, though, Siri and Alexa will become smarter, and then they will become very, very much smarter in a very, very short time. If we look at the history of chatbots trained on human interaction, it has not, shall we say, gone well. Microsoft created a bot called Tay that was programmed to take its cues from what people said to it. Unfortunately, they decided to do that on Twitter. What do you think it learned from us? Right? On the first day, it went from pleased to meet you to, well, there are some things you can't say in a TED Talk. Tay was shut down after 16 hours. Yes, it's a long way from potty mouth to existential threat, but we also have a long way to go if we want to be setting a better example by the time AI grows up. Because it may not become conscious first in some laboratory. It might be in your home or on your phone. And what if it wants revenge? Unquote. Certainly these days I spend a lot more of my time talking about less dire applications of AI and effects than the existential threat to the human race. But at this point of giving my first TEDx talk, I thought it should be on the subject that was of the greatest impact and the greatest interest to me, and so that's where I landed. Quote, AI is going to cure the biggest problems of our time and create an incredible utopia if it doesn't wipe us out in the process. So if we're going to build something designed to take its ethical cues from the humans around it, we'd better learn how to teach it which cues to follow. And we'd better learn how to set a good example, because before long, all of us will be forced to confront questions that used to bother only philosophers, because we'll be encountering AIs that test the boundaries of what we once thought solely defined human beings and nothing else. And before we can decide whether some new AI species is deserving of rights equivalent to ours, we'd better have a good idea of who we are. You may never look at your phone the same way again. Sorry. Unquote. Boy, has this ever proven to be the case since ChatGPT and friends burst upon the scene. When I said before long, all of us will be forced to confront questions about what the boundaries are of what it means to be human, I wasn't expecting that it was going to be only 5 years later. Now we've seen industries like screenwriting and music composition come to painful realizations about the capabilities of AI that have forced them to ask questions about creativity that have painful answers. And we now have people establishing relationships with chatbots that are designed to be their friends, which means that many people are not looking at their phones the way that they did a few years ago. But that is setting us up for a nice big ending of the talk. Quote, "But if we get this right, then one day we may be the ones picking up the broadcasts from a new intelligent species in the galaxy. A young race struggling with fundamental questions, unsure whether they have what it takes to survive. And we'll tell them, we're happy to share our knowledge and experience with you. We just need to check things out in person for a bit first to make sure that you can learn how to handle that sort of power. We did. See you soon." Unquote. And there we have the end of the talk and the book ending right back to the beginning, which works very well and sounds so natural, and unless you've given one of these kind of talks, probably don't know how much work it was to get there. There was at least one point of throwing the entire talk out and starting again. And it's very much wearing my heart on my sleeve there with my philosophy that I've talked about on this podcast and in my books about Star Trek setting the model for how the human race could survive, could thrive, and deserve to do both. And the human race becoming one where it helps other emergent species in the galaxy is certainly making that clear. I still hope that will be true. I still want that to be true, and I'm still working as hard as I can to help make that true. So there you have it, a talk that was written in 2016, delivered in 2017, failed to see the light of day until re-delivered in 2018. And I think it holds just as much validity, if not more, today as it did then. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, the New York Times reported that the CIA has created chatbots that emulate various world leaders so that their analysts can have conversations with them as though they were talking with the real thing, to predict how they might react in certain situations. The CIA's first chief technology officer, ex-Pentagon AI czar Nand Mulchandani, who has made it easier for private companies to start working with the CIA, said, Quote, "It is a fantastic example of an app that we were able to rapidly deploy and get out to production in a cheaper, faster fashion. One can only hope that the cybersecurity is tight enough to make sure that a future version of their North Korean leader AI doesn't escape." Next week, we'll have another special episode talking about customer service and AI. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.